Hi everyone. In today's video, I'll share with you how I managed to pass the B2 Goethe German exam in 6 months of studying from scratch, focusing particularly on a free tool called Anki, and how I use it to achieve this goal. If you're not familiar with Anki, it's a flashcard app that automates the process of spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is a learning method by which you review learned information at gradually increasing intervals. This method uses the spacing effect, which increases the recall of learned information when the learning is spaced out over time as opposed to being crammed into one learning session. For example, you will remember more information if you study for an exam for an hour every day for a week leading up to the exam than if you crammed and studied 7 hours the night before the exam. Spaced repetition is when the intervals in between studying would be gradually increased. This type of learning and studying has been shown to be very effective when you need to learn mass amounts of information, particularly with formulas or vocabulary for a new language. I had used this method in medical school to memorize difficult concepts, and I found it extremely helpful as it saved me a lot of time by speeding up the memorization process while also making the process of learning more enjoyable. It's free to use on all platforms except iOS, and you can easily download and install it from their official website. Once you've done that, you can either start creating your own flashcards or download the decks of flashcards shared by the generous Anki users, which you can see here. For my German learning, I use a couple of free decks available on the Anki shared decks, which I've highlighted on this picture here. One is called A1 Goethe and the other is B1 for Liste Goethe. And the reason I recommend those two is because firstly, they go over the most commonly used words in the German language in a sequential order, and secondly, the generous creators of these decks have also given example sentences for each word, as well as a testing function for the sentences. And I'll expand on that later. So how to use Anki. Once you have downloaded the deck, you can now start studying the flashcards. The way this works is as follows. You open a deck and you're automatically shown the first flashcard. Here you see the German word and your task is to try to guess the English translation. Then you click on Show Answer and you'll see the other side of the card, which is the German translation plus an example sentence. Now comes the important bits. If you know the meaning easily, without effort, then you click the easy option here, and this basically tells the app that you know this card very well and don't need to review it until 4 days have passed. Whereas if you've never seen this card before or can only partially remember, then you choose the again option to tell the app that you want to review this card again soon in a few minutes. This process ensures that if you review cards that you're less confident with until you can easily remember them, while also making sure that the more easier cards are also kept for review for a later date to further reinforce them in your memory. Now that you know how to use the app and how it serves your memory, I'll share my personal method and tips on how to optimize this process so you can get the most out of your experience, and I highly recommend you adhere to these tips if you want to learn new vocabulary as efficiently and as quickly as possible. The first tip is to say it out loud. Every time you're tested on a card, say the word in German and try to guess a sentence as well, even if you make mistakes. By doing this, not only do you further enhance the retention of the words using vocal aids, you're also practicing your speech and pronunciation and improving your fluency in the process. If you're not sure of the proper pronunciation, just put it in Google Translate and see how the AI says it. The second very important tip is to supplement your cards with definitive article, plural, and tenses. And you can do that with the edit function. Articles are one of the biggest difficulty in learning German, as each different noun has a different article. And so it is important that you try to memorize the definitive article for different nouns as you're learning new nouns. There are rules that can determine which article belongs to which noun, but there are too many and there are many exceptions, and thus I highly recommend that you supplement your cards with the definitive article so that you're not struggling with this in the future. Another important part to supplement your card is the plural form of nouns, and also supplementing the cards with the tenses of the verbs, as there are many exceptions, and it would make your life much easier if you learn them in addition to learning the meaning. The third really important tip is to learn example sentences and know how to use the words in context, as it is pointless to learn words without getting a sense of how they're used. So try to learn one sentence with each word at least. You don't have to memorize the sentence, but it is worth seeing the word being used. For certain words with many uses, such as gehen or machen, you should try to see more than one example. And here, for example, the word aber, which means but, has a lot of different uses. And so in this card, we see different sentences for this word. And the final tip is to be honest with yourself. Do not try to rush through the cards just so that you can go through them quickly and pat yourself on the back that you have finished this, the number of cards you have designated for that day. This will not help you and it will give you a false sense of confidence. And you should be careful with that. So why do I think this method works? First of all, vocabulary is one of the most important but challenging aspects of learning any language. And known methods of learning new vocabulary, including reading, listening to music, or watching movies or TV shows in German, or learning the new words while learning from textbooks, are all great methods and they do work, but they tend to be slow, and you're much more likely to forget the words as you don't review them as often as you do when you're using this app. In addition, unless you're watching or reading children material or textbooks, you will likely also encounter rare words that you should not be focusing on early on in your learning journey, as they could confuse you. And with the decks that I recommended, you're getting intensive repetition of the most common words in German language. And those words, which range between 2,000 to 4,000 words, they represent 90% of written and spoken German. The third reason this method works is that it feels like a game, and it is really rewarding as compared to the other methods. Because you can see your progression in real time, and you see your card counter going down, getting closer and closer to finishing the deck. And in addition, it improves different skills simultaneously if done properly. As I mentioned earlier, you should be speaking the cards, and that will improve your pronunciation and your speech. By learning the sentences, you're learning common phrases, which will also improve your speech and fluency. By learning how to say the words, you're also learning how to spell the words, and you're also improving your speech this way. And by learning how the words are said properly, you're also improving your hearing at the same time. Finally, I want to touch upon the topic of passive learning. And what I mean by that is, once you've been doing the Anki app for a few weeks, with some very basic background in grammar, which you can get from studying like one textbook, you should start watching shows or TV or movies in German dubs or German subtitles in your relaxing time or on your commutes. This way, you start encountering the words that you learned, which further imprints these words in your memory. I highly recommend Netflix for this, as they have a big collection of shows and movies with German subtitles or dubs. For example, I watched all 9 seasons of How I Met Your Mother in German. And I also watched that 70s show in German. And those 2 shows helped me a lot. I also recommend the podcast Easy German. They talk about a variety of topics without using too complicated words. And the hosts of the podcast are very lovely and wholesome. Now, obviously, I didn't only use Anki to prepare for the exam, but it was definitely the tool that I used the most, and I give the most credit for allowing me to achieve this milestone in a relatively timely manner. For other aspects of German, I used this book for grammar. It's called Grammatik Aktiv, and it goes from A1 to B1, and I found it very sufficient, but I also supplemented that with online resources, just Googling what I don't understand, or using YouTube. And in addition, before the exam, I did a lot of samples of reading passages and hearing from past exams. And for the writing, I read a lot of sample answers to learn the structure and proper punctuation. But I also used this tool that you see here called Italki, where you can hire private tutors online for a variety of prices. And you can see reviews of these tutors and other things as well. And you can use these tutors on this website to correct your writing. And so before my actual exam, about 1 to 2 weeks before the exam, I took 3 45 minutes lessons online to improve my speech and to see whether my speech passes for B2 and to correct some of the writing that I had done. And to see what mistakes I was making. And I also found that very helpful. And you might take more lessons online because some of these lessons are very cheap. There are also offers for just casual conversation on these websites. And in addition, I also spoke to a friend of mine who is German to improve my speech. But I only did that very few times. And I mostly relied on my speaking skills that I developed using the Anki app by saying the words out loud, and saying the sentences out loud, and listening to a lot of German material. Thank you for watching the video. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments and I'll try my best to answer as many as I can. I'll leave links for all the resources I recommended in the description.